My mother didn't knock. She never knocked. She walked into the kitchen where I was standing at the counter, still in my work clothes because I'd just gotten home 40 minutes earlier, and she set her coffee mug down like she was planting a flag. "Your brother needs the basement suite," she said. "He's moving back from Calgary, and he needs somewhere stable while he gets sorted. So we're going to need you to find your own place." I looked at her. The kettle behind me was still running. "You're serious," I said. She picked up her mug again. "You're 29 years old, Lena. It's time." She walked back out. I heard the television go on in the living room. My father didn't say anything from his chair in the den, which was its own kind of answer. I turned off the kettle and stood there for a long moment looking at the backsplash my grandmother had tiled herself 30 years ago. Small blue squares in a pattern that didn't quite line up, but somehow worked anyway. What my mother didn't know, what she had never once thought to look into, was that the house she had just decided to reorganize around my brother's needs was not hers. The mortgage had been in my name for 2 years. Every property tax payment, every insurance renewal, every bill connected to that address ran through my account. The house belonged to me. Not in a metaphorical sense. Legally, on paper. She had no idea. Let me back up, because this didn't come from nowhere. I grew up the second child in a family where being second meant being invisible in a very specific way. My brother Tristan was 4 years older than me and had always operated on a different set of rules. The kind that go unwritten in families, but everyone understands anyway. He got the car on weekends. He got the benefit of the doubt in arguments. He got my parents' full attention through every setback, every job change, every bad decision that somehow always got reframed as a learning experience. I got quiet pride when I did well, and quiet disappointment when I didn't, which is a much lonelier thing than people realize. I put myself through Ryerson, Toronto Metropolitan now, but it was Ryerson when I went. On a combination of scholarships, OSAP, and 2 part-time jobs. My parents contributed nothing financially, and I am not saying that with bitterness. I am saying it because it matters for what came later. I graduated with a degree in accounting, passed my CPA exams on the first attempt, and got hired at a mid-sized firm in downtown Toronto that did tax work for small businesses. I was good at it. I became very good at it. When I moved back in with my parents at 26, it was supposed to be temporary. 3, maybe 4 months while I saved enough for a down payment. The rental market in the GTA had gotten to a point where even people with my income were doing the math over and over and coming up with the same dispiriting answer. So I went home. I paid rent. Not a symbolic amount, $1,200 a month, which was below market but real money. Money my parents used for their utilities and groceries, and the occasional trip to their friend's cottage in Muskoka. I did not complain about this. I did not track it on a spreadsheet the way part of my brain wanted to. I told myself it was practical and temporary, and fine. It became less temporary. Tristan, meanwhile, had moved to Calgary 4 years earlier for a relationship that lasted 8 months and a job in oil and gas that lasted about as long. He called my parents every Sunday and they talked for an hour. They talked about his prospects and his social life and how hard the Alberta winters were. When I came home from a promotion and told my mother over dinner, she said that's wonderful, and then asked if I thought Tristan should try to transfer to a company in Toronto. I learned to stop noticing. That's what you do. About 2.5 years ago, my father came to find me on a Saturday afternoon when my mother was out at her sister's. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, with the particular careful posture of someone who has been rehearsing a conversation and is afraid of how it's going to go. He told me that they had a problem. The house had a line of credit against it. A HELOC they'd taken out 6 years ago when they redid the upstairs bathroom and replaced the furnace, and then kept drawing from over the years for things I had never been told about and didn't ask about now. The balance had grown. Interest rates had gone up considerably. They were behind on payments, and the bank had sent letters that had progressed from polite to serious. He had not told my mother how serious it had gotten, because my mother had a specific way of responding to financial stress that made everything harder, and he had been hoping it would resolve itself, which it had not. "How much?" I asked. He told me. I kept my face still. The number was manageable. Not comfortable, not easy, but manageable for someone with my salary and my savings habits and my complete absence of expensive hobbies. I asked him to show me the paperwork, and he went and got a folder from the filing cabinet in his office. An accordion file, faded green, that I had seen sitting on that shelf my entire life and never thought about. And I spent 2 hours going through it at the kitchen table, while he sat across from me and watched. The situation was recoverable. Barely, but recoverable. I called my mortgage broker on Monday. I spent 3 weeks working through the numbers. What I proposed to my father was this: I would pay off the outstanding HELOC balance and cover the arrears. In exchange, he would transfer the title of the house into my name. He could continue to live there, my mother could continue to live there, the arrangement on the surface would look exactly the same. But the house would be mine. He agreed. I think part of him was relieved to have the weight of it out of his hands. We used a real estate lawyer in Scarborough, a woman I found through a colleague who had done a similar transaction in an estate situation. The paperwork took about 6 weeks. My father signed, his name came off the deed. My name went on, my mother was not part of that conversation. My father's reasoning, which I did not argue with, was that she would resist the idea on principle and make it impossible, and the important thing was that the house not go into foreclosure. I thought he was probably right. I thought we could tell her later, after things had settled, when it wouldn't feel like something being done to her. Later never happened. She never asked about the mortgage. She never looked at the mail. She assumed, as she had always assumed, that the house was simply there, the way houses are simply there, background and solid and permanent and hers. Until it wasn't. I packed one bag on the night she told me to leave. Not because I intended to go. I knew by then that I had no legal obligation to go anywhere, but because I needed to be somewhere that wasn't that house while I thought through how I wanted to handle what was coming. I drove to my friend Kezia's place in Etobicoke and slept on her couch and stared at the ceiling for most of the night. Kezia had known about the title transfer from the beginning. She was the one who'd told me, almost 2 years earlier, that I needed to write it down, keep the documentation somewhere safe, not leave anything to memory or goodwill. She was practical in the way that only people who have watched things go wrong for other people can be. She didn't say, "I told you so," when I showed up at her door with a canvas bag and the look of someone who had just been told to leave their own house. She put the kettle on and sat across from me and said, "Okay, what's the play?" I didn't sleep much. I didn't need to. I already knew what was going to happen next. The question was when. It happened at 4:30 in the morning. My father called 11 times between 4:22 and 4:38. I know because I was awake, and I watched each call come in and let it go to voicemail, and then watched the next one arrive, and it was only after the 11th that I understood something had shifted and picked up. "She found the ownership papers," he said. He sounded like someone had let the air out of him. "She was looking for the renewal documents on the home insurance. She went into the filing cabinet and she found the transfer documents. She found your name on the deed." I waited. "She's very upset," he said. "I know," I said. "She's saying there must have been a mistake. There wasn't." He went quiet for long enough that I checked the screen to see if we'd been disconnected. Then he said, very quietly, "I know. My mother called 25 minutes later." Her voice had the texture of something that has been heated past its limit and is now slightly warped. Still functional, still recognizable, but permanently changed. She told me that there had clearly been some kind of error at the lawyer's office. She told me that my father would never have signed over the family home without her knowledge. She told me that she was going to call her own lawyer, a threat that had no teeth, but she didn't know that yet, and have the whole thing looked into. I let her finish. I had grown up learning exactly where the spaces were in my mother's sentences, where the breath came and the certainty broke just slightly. "There was no error, Mom," I said. "Dad came to me because you were about to lose the house. He didn't tell you how bad it had gotten. The HELOC was in arrears, and the bank was starting foreclosure proceedings. I paid it off. In exchange, he transferred the title. That happened almost 2 years ago. I have every document." The silence after that was different from my father's silence. His had been the silence of someone exhausted. Hers was the silence of someone whose story about how things worked had just developed a crack large enough to put a hand through. "That's our house," she said, and in her voice was something I hadn't expected. Not anger exactly, but something more like bewilderment. Like a person who has walked into a room and discovered the furniture rearranged in the dark. "It was going to belong to the bank," I said. "Now it belongs to me." The next 3 days were loud in the way that only extended family can be. My mother called her sister, who called my mother's cousin, who called me to explain in a very reasonable voice that property was complicated, and perhaps I should think about what I was doing to the family. My father's brother, Uncle Ray, left a voicemail saying he hoped we could all sit down and discuss this like adults. I returned none of these calls on the first day. On the second, I called each of them back and said the same thing every time. The house was facing foreclosure. My parents had not told anyone. I intervened with my own money through a legal transaction. There was nothing to negotiate because nothing wrong had been done. Tristan called on the second afternoon. I had been expecting this call more than any of the others, because Tristan had always had a particular skill for entering a conflict late, with just enough information to sound reasonable, and exiting with exactly what he wanted. He started with sympathy. Said he understood I'd been put in an uncomfortable position, that Mom could be difficult, that the way she'd spoken to me wasn't fair. He said all of this with the warm, unhurried confidence of someone who has never had to wonder whether they were the favorite. Then he said that obviously the practical reality was that he still needed somewhere to stay while he got reestablished in the city, and given that I was single and financially stable, and the house had 4 bedrooms, surely there was a way to make this work that didn't involve blowing up the family. I let him finish. Tristan, I said, you're asking me to give you the basement of my house, the house I own, as part of a plan that started with Mom telling me to leave so you could have it. I want you to think about what you're actually asking. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a protest. I don't think that's a fair summary of. It's an accurate summary, I said. You're welcome to look for a rental. There are places in Scarborough and Pickering that are more reasonable right now. I'm happy to send you some listings. He did not respond to that offer. I went back to the house on day 4, not to fight, not to perform anything. I went back because it was mine, and I was done sleeping on Kezia's couch, and I was done pretending that the situation required my absence. My mother was in the kitchen when I walked in. My father was at the table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. Neither of them said anything when I came through the door, which was new. In 30 years of walking into that house, I had never been greeted with silence. Usually there was commentary, about the time, about what I was wearing, about what I should have done differently. The silence was its own kind of acknowledgement. I set my bag down in the hall and walked into the kitchen and sat down across from my mother. She looked different, not smaller exactly. My mother was not someone who shrank physically, but less certain. Like someone who had been operating from a map that had turned out to be wrong and was now standing still, trying to reorient. I'm not asking you to leave, I said. I want to be clear about that. This is still your home in every way that matters practically. I'm not going to turn this into something cruel. She looked at me. Her jaw moved slightly. But I need 2 things, I said. First, that what you said to me when you told me to leave, that I was a burden, that I had never contributed, that I was taking up space that should belong to Tristan. I need both of you to acknowledge that it wasn't true. Not apologize, if that's just acknowledge out loud that it wasn't true. My father said immediately, it wasn't true. Lena, none of that was true. You've done more for this house then. He stopped. His voice had gone unsteady. My mother was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought she wasn't going to, long enough that I was ready to stand up and leave and come back another day. Then she said, you didn't deserve to be spoken to that way. It wasn't everything, but it was real. I could tell the difference. Second, I said, Tristan doesn't move into the basement. He's an adult with an income and a history of making his own choices. He can find his own place. If he wants to come for dinner, he's welcome. But he doesn't live here. My mother opened her mouth, closed it. That's not negotiable, I said, and the steadiness in my voice surprised even me. I'm not saying it to punish anyone. I'm saying it because it's my house, and those are the terms I'm choosing. Tristan found a 1-bedroom apartment in Leslieville about 3 weeks later. He texted me a photo of the living room on moving day, which I thought was an interesting choice, either an olive branch or a proof of concept. I wasn't sure which. I sent back a thumbs up. We haven't talked much since. That might change. It might not. My mother and I have reached something that isn't exactly warmth, but isn't what it was before either. She asked me last month if she could repaint the front hallway. I said yes, and asked her to run the color by me first, and she did. A sort of sage green, which was not what I would have picked, but also not bad. The hallway looks fine. She seemed pleased. My father and I have coffee on Saturday mornings when the weather is good enough to sit outside. He doesn't talk about the HELOC or the paperwork or those months before he came to me. I don't bring it up either. But there's something between us now that didn't exist before, an honesty, maybe. A mutual understanding that we have both seen the thing behind the curtain and agreed to keep living in the house anyway. What I didn't expect after everything was how quiet it would feel. I had spent so many years managing the noise of that family, the currents and the favoritisms and the small daily humiliations, that I had expected resolution to feel loud, a door slamming, a dramatic exit, something cinematic. Instead, it felt like the morning last November when the clocks went back and I woke up an hour earlier than usual, and the house was completely still, and the light through the kitchen window was that particular flat gray that means winter is almost here. And I made coffee and sat at the table and didn't hear anything except the radiator in the street outside. And I thought, this is mine. Not the way I always told myself it would feel someday, distant and abstract. Actually mine, the mortgage payment that comes out of my account every first of the month. The name on the deed at the land registry office downtown. The blue tile backsplash that my grandmother laid and that I will never replace because some things are worth keeping exactly as they are. I let the coffee get warm. That was enough. If you've ever been the one in your family who kept things running while everyone else looked the other way, hit subscribe, because every week we tell stories about the people who stayed quiet, held the line, and changed everything without making a scene. You won't want to miss what's coming next.